The president's trade war with China has ripped a hole straight through the American heartland, pulling hard-working farmers into a fight they never asked for. The stakes are not abstract, they're painfully real. And the victims are men and women who rise before dawn, spend their lives working the soil, and depend on those harvests to keep their families, their towns, and their futures alive. For generations, America's farmers believed they could weather any storm, whether it came from drought, flood, or fluctuating prices. But nothing prepared them for this: a political war that has turned their lifeline into a noose. Across the fields of the Midwest, soybean crops sit heavy and unwanted. Milk is being dumped. Corn that should have been loaded onto ships for Asia now clogs the docks. Silos overflow. What should have been a season of prosperity has instead turned into a season of loss, so brutal, so unforgiving, that farmers speak of it with disbelief. "I never thought I was going to lose this much money this fast," one farmer confessed. "This isn't about failed harvests or poor soil. The seeds were planted, the crops came in, and the barns and silos are full. The work was done right. But the buyers vanished." Contracts that farmers depended on were shredded overnight. China, once America's single biggest agricultural customer, slammed its doors shut. And the silence from overseas markets has been louder, more devastating than any storm could ever be. The ripple effects are staggering. Truck drivers who once hauled grain are sidelined. Processing plants scale back or idle completely. Small rural banks, the ones that provide the loans farmers need to plant the next season, tighten their credit. Whole towns that depend on agriculture feel their lifelines slipping away. As if tariffs weren't enough, farmers are also staring down unpredictable weather and rising costs that gnaw at whatever scraps of profit remain. Every shipment stranded, every paycheck delayed, adds to a mounting crisis that no insurance program can hope to cover. How deep does the damage go? What does it mean for the families who live by the land, for the towns whose identities are tied to the Farm Belt? And can Washington stop the bleeding before the damage becomes permanent? For decades, American farmers had one constant they could count on: a steady buyer across the Pacific. Sure, the system wasn't perfect, but the trade routes were open, the demand was strong, and the market was predictable. That reliability shattered almost overnight in April 2025, when Washington slapped sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports. The retaliation was brutal and precise. Within just 6 weeks, U.S. agricultural exports to China were cut in half. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't a debate. It was billions of dollars in goods, real goods, that suddenly had no market. Take California's Central Valley. Almonds that used to flow directly to cargo ships bound for Asia are now stacked in warehouses, unsold. Chinese import contracts evaporated without warning. At the port of Oakland, the collapse was the same story. Almond and dairy shipments down by more than 40%. These aren't projections. They're hard numbers, proof that China's demand for American produce fell away almost instantly. And here's the bitter truth: there is no replacement buyer of equal scale. Europe is already drowning in its own produce and cannot absorb the glut. Southeast Asia can take a sliver, but the volumes are far too small to make any meaningful difference. That leaves millions of tons of soybeans, corn, milk, and almonds with nowhere to go. The consequences are brutal. Harvests spoil. Milk is poured out. Silos overflow. Each season of losses drives farmers deeper into debt. Loans pile up, operating costs keep climbing, and livelihoods collapse in real time. This is no longer about one crop, one state, or one bad season. It's a chain reaction that cuts across the entire agricultural economy. From California's orchards to Iowa's cornfields, every container that fails to leave port ripples through local businesses. Truckers face fewer loads. Processing plants cut shifts. Rural banks brace for defaults as farmers fall behind on payments. Small towns, towns where agriculture is the backbone, are being pushed toward collapse. The pressure is now so overwhelming that farm groups across the Midwest are openly begging Washington to strike a deal with Beijing. Any deal. Pride, politics, and positioning no longer matter. For them, it has become a fight for survival. The roots of this disaster trace back to Washington's decision to launch a tariff campaign. The administration framed the move as a crackdown on unfair practices, slapping duties on Chinese imports as high as 145%. Beijing didn't hesitate. Its counterattack was swift, calculated, and devastating. American farm goods were targeted with surgical precision. Tariffs designed to hammer rural states that had backed Trump politically. Economists had warned this was coming, but when the blow finally landed, the reality was far worse than anyone had predicted. Because Beijing didn't just hit back, it seized the moment. China used the crisis to accelerate a much bigger strategy. Instead of waiting for shortages, it rewired its supply chains on the spot. Brazil and Argentina rushed to fill the gap, locking in long-term contracts and shipping their crops directly to Chinese ports. Australia expanded its dairy and beef exports. Within months, Beijing had diversified its suppliers, cutting its reliance on U.S. goods to the bone. And here's what matters most. This wasn't temporary. It was structural. It was intentional. And it marked a deeper rebalancing of global trade. For Washington, the fallout spread far beyond the fields. It took decades of painstaking work to build American access to China's market, and that access vanished almost overnight. For Beijing, however, the disruption was an opportunity, a chance to deepen ties with South America, strengthen regional trade blocs, and present itself as the reliable partner in the global economy. That's the weight of this moment. In agricultural trade, the buyer decides who prospers and who gets pushed aside. And China isn't just any buyer, it's the biggest buyer on the planet. By turning south instead of west, Beijing sent an unmistakable message. American farmers are no longer essential to its supply chain. This isn't just a downturn. What emerged in 2025 is a fundamental shift in the balance of global agriculture. The American Farm Belt has become the stage for a geopolitical battle where tariffs aren't just economic tools, they're weapons of influence and alliances. And the longer Washington clings to its tariff-first strategy, the more permanent this realignment becomes. The speed of China's pivot is staggering. There was no lag, no waiting period. The transition was immediate, decisive, and carried out on a massive scale. Within just a few months, Brazil, Argentina, and other South American producers had become the backbone of China's food imports. The clearest example is soybeans. China consumes more than 60% of the world's soybean supply. For years, U.S. farmers were central to feeding that demand. But the tariff war pushed Beijing to pivot almost entirely to South America. U.S. producers were left stranded. For them, this was more than just another bad season. It was the collapse of a market they had spent decades cultivating. Their investments in land, equipment, and logistics, all built on the assumption that China would remain a steady customer, suddenly meant nothing. That assumption no longer holds. Meanwhile, their competitors seized the opening. Brazil and Argentina expanded infrastructure, modernized ports, and cemented their place as China's primary suppliers. And their gains aren't short-term windfalls. They're locking in long-term positions in the global market. American farmers, by contrast, are watching their share evaporate. The financial toll is severe. Operating costs continue to climb even as returns plunge. Insurance programs can't cover the losses from contracts that simply vanished. Banks hesitate to extend new credit. Younger farmers openly question whether staying in the business makes sense, while older ones consider retiring without successors willing to take on the crushing risk. The collapse doesn't stop at the farm gate. The entire rural economy is caught in the fallout. Equipment dealers see fewer buyers. Truckers take fewer loads. Feed suppliers cut back. Every missed shipment and every unpaid bill ripples through small towns, dragging local businesses down with it. And yet, the economic pain is only part of the story. The geopolitical consequences may be even more devastating. By locking in alternative suppliers, China has weakened one of America's most powerful levers of influence. Agriculture had long been a strategic asset, giving the United States unmatched global reach. That advantage is slipping away fast. The world is watching, and the perception of America as the indispensable food supplier is eroding. This is the true cost of the tariff war. It's not just the billions drained from U.S. farms. It's the reshaping of global trade patterns in ways that may prove irreversible. The Farm Belt is no longer just battling weather and markets. It's up against a new world order where political decisions carry consequences far beyond a single harvest. And every month that passes, the situation hardens. South American producers keep expanding their capacity. China keeps locking in contracts. Other trading partners tighten their bonds, and the space for American farmers shrinks further. So the question becomes, how much more can the Farm Belt endure before collapse turns permanent? How long can farmers wait for a real plan? When Washington seems to have none, the numbers are brutal. In 2023, Brazil shipped more than 54 million tons of soybeans to China, nearly three-quarters of China's total imports. By August 2025, that share had skyrocketed to 90%. American shipments, once central to China's food security, have nearly disappeared. The consequences are catastrophic across the Midwest. Grain silos overflow with crops that have no destination. Prices keep falling. Farmers stand in their fields, staring at harvests they cannot sell. And soybeans are only part of it. Beef, corn, dairy, poultry, commodities that once flowed reliably into Chinese ports, now face shrinking demand. South American competitors are filling the void. Argentina and Uruguay have increased their meat exports. Brazil, already China's dominant soybean supplier, has also risen to become its top corn supplier after Beijing opened markets in 2022. None of this happened by accident. China has invested billions in South American agriculture to guarantee long-term supply. In Brazil, railways stretch deeper into farm country. Ports are modernized. Cold storage facilities spring up at lightning speed. Much of it financed by Chinese loans or joint ventures designed to serve Beijing's needs for decades to come. Every ship that leaves Santos or Paranagua for China carries more than grain. It carries proof that the United States has been displaced. Proof that America has lost its role as an indispensable partner in the world's largest food relationship. And make no mistake, this partnership is about far more than soybeans or corn. China has positioned itself as the largest foreign investor in Latin America's oil sector, tying its fortunes closely to Venezuela, Brazil, and Ecuador. In Peru and Chile, Chinese firms control some of the most valuable copper mines on Earth, resources essential for factories, electronics, and renewable energy. Highways, railroads, and power grids across South America increasingly bear the stamp of Chinese corporations, built with Belt and Road financing. These aren't isolated deals. They're part of a sweeping framework that links South America's future directly to China's rise. Politically, these moves sync perfectly with the broader ambitions of BRICS. Brazil has been pushing for the bloc's expansion, while Venezuela and Bolivia speak openly about building a multipolar world led by emerging economies. For governments across South America, China is more than just a customer. It's a development partner that doesn't attach the political strings often tied to American or IMF loans. Where Washington once held sway, Beijing is now seen as more consistent, more willing, and more committed. The numbers tell the story plainly. China's grip on South American trade is tightening, and the U.S. Farm Belt is paying the price. The devastation back home is visible everywhere. Crops rot in the fields because there aren't enough workers to gather them. Dairy operations run below capacity because herds can't be managed at full scale. Meatpacking plants cut shifts, close lines, and send workers home. It's not just a labor issue, it's the perfect storm of lost export markets, declining credit, and disappearing buyers. Farmers are surrounded by pressures on every side. And here's the brutal truth. This isn't the result of natural disasters. It's not failed harvests or freak weather patterns. Farmers planted. Farmers harvested. They did their jobs. The system only collapsed because the customers, the contracts, and the financing that kept it sustainable were pulled away by political choices. Farms that had survived droughts, floods, and decades of market swings are now teetering on the edge of collapse. Not because of nature's wrath, but because of man-made policies that dismantled their foundations. The story of America's Farm Belt is being rewritten in real time. Once the world's most reliable food producer, a symbol of abundance and stability, it is now becoming the case study of a global power shift. Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay are filling China's warehouses. Beijing's influence is spreading into every corner of Latin America. And American farmers? They're left staring at mounting debts, shredded contracts, and shrinking communities. The damage isn't temporary. With each season that passes, the path back grows narrower, the options fewer. South American competitors aren't standing still. They're locking in contracts, expanding infrastructure, and entrenching themselves as China's go-to suppliers. If Washington stays its current course, the collapse of America's Farm Belt won't be remembered as an unavoidable misfortune. It will be recorded as a man-made turning point, a choice that shifted the balance of power across the entire hemisphere. And that raises the toughest questions yet. How far will this crisis spread before the damage is permanent? Can the United States find a way back into the world's largest food market? Or has that chapter already closed? Look at the reality. By August 2025, Brazil supplied 90% of China's soy imports. That's dominance so overwhelming, it leaves almost no room for American producers. Corn, beef, poultry, and dairy are following the same path, with South America cementing its place. China has secured supply, diversified risk, and gained leverage. The United States has lost market share, credibility, and influence. Meanwhile, the rural crisis deepens. Farmers who once believed their children would inherit the land now face the possibility that no one will take it on. Younger generations watch their parents' struggles and decide the risk isn't worth it. Small towns that thrived on farm money are shrinking, storefronts closing, families moving away. This is no longer just about exports. It's about the unraveling of rural America. Every missed shipment, every unpaid loan, every farm auction isn't just an economic loss. It's a piece of a community disappearing. And all of it traces back to choices made in Washington. choices that treated farms as bargaining chips in a geopolitical gamble. Choices that underestimated how fast China could pivot, how decisively South America could step up, and how devastating the fallout would be. The Farm Belt is now competing in a world where politics dictates survival. And the political decisions of 2025 have left America's farmers exposed, weakened, and facing an enemy they cannot fight. A global realignment where they are no longer essential. Every passing month cements that reality. Brazil keeps building railways and ports. Argentina keeps expanding capacity. Uruguay keeps shipping more meat. And China keeps tightening its grip on these supply chains with money, contracts, and infrastructure. So here's the haunting question. When historians look back, will they see this as the moment America surrendered its role as the world's indispensable food supplier? Will they call it the turning point when Beijing captured not just markets, but influence over an entire hemisphere? What's certain is this. The crisis tearing through America's Farm Belt isn't an accident. It's not an act of God. It's a man-made disaster. And unless Washington finds a strategy, fast, the collapse won't just mark the end of an era for U.S. farmers. It will mark the beginning of a new global order. One where America's heartland is no longer the beating center of the world's food supply, but a cautionary tale of how political choices can erase generations of hard work in the blink of an eye.